Have you ever felt like you were living a nightmare, right in your own home? Have you ever trusted someone so much, someone who claimed to love God, who preached about faithfulness, forgiveness, and love, and suddenly everything fell apart? If you've ever been through something like this, or know someone who has, stay with me until the end. What you'll discover now may surprise you and perhaps even set you free. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 38 years old, and I've been a Christian since I was 14. I grew up hearing that God would bless my home if I was a woman of faith, submissive, dedicated to my husband and the church. I followed this path with all my heart. I fasted, prayed, cared for my family, served in ministry. I believed that love, when built on Christ, was unshakable. I truly believed this, until the day I discovered that my own husband was cheating on me, and not with just anyone. With the Missionary we hosted in our home, with the best of intentions. Yes, that's exactly what you heard. And no, I'm not here to play the victim. I'm here to tell a truth that many people pretend not to see. The suffering of Christian women who face betrayal, emotional abandonment, and silencing within their own faith. Because it's not just about a marriage ending. It's about the guilt they place on you, about the veiled judgment, about the shame that prevents you from speaking out. It's about looking around, inside the church, the place where you should find support, and feeling like no one sees you anymore, or worse, that everyone blames you. Maybe you're going through this right now. Maybe you're starting to suspect something, or maybe you're trying to rebuild the pieces of yourself in silence. I know how it hurts, and that's why I'm here. Because I've been silent for too long, and today I choose to use my story as a beacon for those lost in the storm. This is the truth behind a broken Christian home, and a woman who had to choose between fear and freedom. And it all began the day I opened my door to welcome someone in the name of God. I married a man I met at church at 24. He was a deacon, highly respected by everyone. He had that firm posture, a calm voice, always with a Bible in his hand and a verse on his lips. He seemed like the ideal man, and in my mind, as a young Christian, he was a direct answer to my prayers. Everyone said we made a blessed couple, and I felt secure in my role as the wife of a leader, believing we had everything it took to live a solid and lasting marriage. I saw it as a purpose, a calling. It wasn't just love, it was a mission. The truth is, deep down, I felt responsible for keeping that dream of a perfect family going. I took on this mission as a silent burden. I woke up early to take care of the house, worked outside the home, prepared Bible studies, led the women's group at church, and still found the strength to be that attentive, dedicated, and virtuous wife, as I was so often reminded from the pulpit. He was more reserved, enjoying giving advice, but at home, little by little, he became absent. Not physically, he was there, but emotionally, he always seemed to be elsewhere. And I thought it was a phase. Every marriage goes through moments like this. After all, we were both serving God. The problem is, when you live inside this bubble of faith, there's a hidden pressure to ignore the signs. You spiritualize everything, feel empty, fast, feel unloved, pray more, have doubts, rebuke, and we convince ourselves that the problem is always within us, in something we haven't done, haven't prayed for, haven't sacrificed enough. I couldn't see that behind that pious demeanor lay coldness. There was distance. There was a hidden truth, hidden under the cloak of holiness. But I continued to believe in what seemed like a blessed home. And it was in this seemingly stable environment that we received the pastor's request to welcome a missionary who had recently returned from an international trip. It was a temporary arrangement, just until she could regroup. I happily said yes. It was common among us to welcome brothers on mission, and I saw this as an opportunity to serve even more. It never crossed my mind that this decision would open the door to the greatest wound of my life. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject. I grew up hearing that a wise woman builds a home, that a virtuous wife is her husband's crown. These words became a kind of invisible track, a silent route I believed I needed to follow to the letter if I wanted to be approved by God, the church, and most importantly, my own heart. So I pushed myself, more than anyone could see. While the world applauded me for being that woman of faith, behind the scenes of my routine lay a profound exhaustion. I prayed in the morning before anything else, made coffee, organized the house, took care of work, and still found time to serve at church. I never allowed myself to stop. I never felt like I was enough. It was as if I was always indebted. The expectation was clear: to be strong, sweet, wise, balanced, patient, understanding, and above all, submissive, even when the love seemed to grow cold and the care stopped being reciprocated. I remember spending sleepless nights worrying about him, wondering if everything was okay, if he needed anything, if I could improve as a wife. I read Christian books on marriage, watched sermons, took notes. My heart was willing, but the more I tried to strengthen our bond, the more distant he seemed. And yet I persisted, because for me, marriage was sacred. It was forever, and if something was wrong, I felt it was my responsibility to fix it. Over time, he began to spend more time away. He always said it was church, meetings, visits, projects, and I believed him. After all, we were working for the kingdom. That was his justification for everything. When he treated me coldly, when he seemed indifferent to my presence, when he seemed unconcerned about my feelings, his response was always spiritual. It's just a phase. The enemy wants to bring us down. We need to pray more. And I prayed. I cried into my pillow and asked God to restore my husband's heart, to renew our love. But inside, something was already screaming, a subtle unease, a strange sensation, as if I were fighting an invisible war alone. The worst part was that, in everyone's eyes, we were the perfect couple, and I nurtured this image, not out of hypocrisy, but out of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of disappointment, fear of recognizing that perhaps this marriage wasn't as blessed as it seemed. At the time, I didn't yet understand that there was a hidden truth brewing beneath my roof, and that every effort I made to maintain the appearance of stability was, in practice, distancing me from reality. I spent so much time trying to hold together something that was already crumbling, and I didn't even realize it. Or maybe I did, but I didn't want to admit it. It's hard to accept that what you built with so much faith and dedication is being silently eroded from within, and worse, that the other person simply doesn't seem willing to do anything about it. I kept smiling in services, giving advice to other women, organizing church events. And inside, I just wanted someone to see me, to ask if I was truly okay, to say, "You don't have to carry everything alone." But no one said it, and I didn't say it either. The pain of a Christian woman who suffers in silence is one of the most invisible and deepest wounds, because we get used to putting on an armor of faith, even when we're bleeding inside. We believe that being strong means never showing weakness, never complaining, never questioning. But this is sickening. It's exhausting. And if you, in some way, recognize yourself in what I'm saying, if you've experienced or are experiencing something similar, leave here in the comments what has touched you most so far. You have no idea how much your voice can make a difference, not just for me, but for other women who will feel less alone when they read what you've shared. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. This is how we transform pain into strength and stories into healing. I've always believed that testimonies have power, not only to glorify God, but to free others from the silence that hurts. And today I see how true this is. When we speak with an open heart, when we let go of our masks and reveal the behind the scenes of our journey, something changes, something aligns. The pain begins to make sense, and what was once only darkness begins to transform into a path. It was a Sunday night when the pastor called me aside, right after the service. He spoke with that serious yet caring tone, like someone who trusts you completely. He said a missionary who had recently arrived from the countryside needed a place to stay for 2 weeks, and he immediately thought of our home. "You are such a hospitable couple, so strong in faith," he said, almost like a compliment disguised as a summons. And I accepted, without question, without much thought. For me, opening the door was serving God. And more than that, I wanted to continue being that woman who helps, who welcomes, who obeys. Even though I was tired, even though I felt something was out of place in my own home, I said yes. She arrived with a wide smile and a soft way of speaking. She wore long skirts, read the Bible, often liked to pray aloud, and soon won everyone's sympathy, including him. At first, I didn't notice anything. She was kind, helpful, always ready to help me with lunch, set the table, fold clothes. Sometimes she even complimented me, saying I was an admirable woman. We talked about missions, prayer, plans of faith. Everything seemed so light, so Christian. And perhaps that's why I didn't see what was really happening, the hidden truth. As the days passed, small details began to catch my attention. The way she spoke to my husband, too informal for a newcomer. The loose laughter between them, the long conversations after church, the quick glances they pretended weren't there. I tried to ignore it. I tried to believe it was all in my head. I can't be jealous. She's a woman of God, I repeated mentally. But deep down, something hurt. It was as if the Holy Spirit was silently warning me. Look again. There was one day in particular that really stuck with me. I came home early from work, and the two of them were sitting on the couch, talking quietly, almost whispering. When they saw me, they quickly moved away. She said they were praying for a new church project, but his expression wasn't that of someone praying. It was that of someone caught. And yet, I kept quiet, because I wasn't ready to confront him yet. My mindset was still stuck on the idea that doubt was a sin, that questioning a man of God was a lack of faith. I kept trying to justify what seemed unjustifiable, until the moment the mask truly began to slip, and then there was no denying that something much more serious was happening inside my own home. Our coexistence grew quietly uncomfortable. What once seemed lighthearted became a hidden tension. I woke up every day with that tightness in my chest, that discomfort we try to sweep under the rug of faith. You know that feeling that something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That was it. And yet, I clung to the hope that it was all just a phase. After all, I was a Christian woman, and true Christians forgive bad thoughts and don't harbor distrust. But the hidden truth is that often, our silence becomes the permission others use to cross boundaries. The small signs began to appear more and more clearly. She called my husband by nicknames only I used. She knew his schedule better than I did, and whenever he came home, his eyes would first fall on her. But I kept quiet. I convinced myself it was paranoia, that I needed to have a more spiritual mindset, that my role was to pray more, fast more, be more patient. How often do we nullify ourselves in the name of a misunderstood faith? I continued trying to balance everything, work, church, home, marriage, and swallowing hard against that growing unease. Until one day, returning from a women's retreat, I encountered a situation that changed everything. She was in the kitchen, dressed in a way she never wore in front of guests, laughing loudly at something he'd said, and they both hadn't noticed me enter. It was one of those frozen moments where the body feels it before the mind even understands. His look of surprise when he saw me there, her discomfort, trying to feign naturalness. But the damage had already been done. That image was etched in my memory, like a painful photograph. And, for the first time, I felt an internal rupture, as if something inside me said, "You need to stop pretending you don't see." From that day on, everything that had previously been a question began to fall into place clearly. The whispered conversations, the knowing glances, the silences between us. He became more distant, she bolder. And me? I continued trying to keep up appearances, because it's not easy to admit that your life has become a backdrop for something you never expected to experience. The emotional impact is profound. It's like watching your own home crumble, yet still having to smile at Sunday service. That day, everything seemed normal. Coffee brewed. He was getting ready to go out. Me taking care of the housework. The same routine that's been repeated for years, as if it were synonymous with stability. But the truth is, routine can hide a lot, including well-disguised betrayals. That's when his phone beeped. He'd left it on the table, and I didn't look for anything. I didn't even touch it. It was just an automatic glance, the kind we give without thinking. And there, on the lock screen, the notification appeared. A name saved subtly, as if trying not to arouse suspicion. But what really stopped me was the phrase, "I love you too." At that moment, I felt the ground disappear from under my feet. It's difficult to describe what happens inside us when pain meets proof, because until then, I'd lived between perceptions and intuitions, trying to silence the inner scream with arguments of faith. But that message wasn't a hunch. It was concrete. It was a brutal revelation, a punch to the soul. My heart raced, my vision blurred, and while everything hurt, there was a part of me that felt relieved to finally see clearly what I'd pretended didn't exist. I wanted to scream, to confront, to cry out loud, but I couldn't do anything. I sat on the couch, my soul in tatters, trying to absorb the impact. What had I done wrong? Where had I lost myself? Was I not enough, even though I gave my all? These were the questions that invaded me violently. But deep down, a voice inside began to whisper something else. You're not to blame for what the other person chose to do in secret. It's at this point in their journey that many women find themselves, silently mourning something that's still standing, but has already died inside, continuing to smile in the back rooms of the church while carrying a heart full of cracks. And the cruelest thing is that even faced with the truth, we hesitate. Doubt takes different forms. Should I face this now? Will he deny it? Will they blame me? It's a mixture of emotion, fear, and shame all at once. And there, in that room, holding back tears to keep quiet, I knew something inside me had changed forever. I still didn't know what I was going to do. I hadn't made up my mind yet. But one thing was already clear. I couldn't keep pretending I hadn't seen it. That same night, while he slept peacefully beside me, as if nothing had happened, I lay awake, my heart pounding, my thoughts jumbled, and a lump in my throat that seemed to have no end. I needed to understand where this was going. It wasn't just about a sentence on my phone screen. It was about my sanity, about not feeling crazy, about putting together the puzzle that had been messing with my soul for so long. I opened his laptop, one he rarely used, but which for some reason was still linked to his personal email account. I wasn't looking for details. I just wanted confirmation. But what I found was much more than that. Each click was a plunge into a deeper abyss. There were old messages, exchanged during late nights when I thought he was praying. Photos stored in a hidden folder with dates that matched exactly the days she was still staying at our house. And there were also declarations, confessions. They'd been together for months, and it all started right there, before my eyes, as I served coffee and washed dishes for her like someone caring for a sister. It was a feeling of violation, as if they had invaded my home, my history, my identity. It wasn't just a marital betrayal. It was a betrayal of trust, of faith, of friendship, of ministry. They both prayed with me. They praised with me. They called me a woman of God while hiding a dark secret behind smiles and verses. I reread every passage of those conversations, trying to understand when everything was lost, and, most painfully, trying to figure out when I had stopped being chosen. They say there's a fine line between faith and naivete, and for a long time, I called faith what was actually a fear of facing the truth, a fear of accepting that sometimes, even though I'm good, even though I'm faithful, even though I pray and fast, pain arrives, lies arrive, and they arrive at the hands of those we trust most. It was that early morning, staring at that illuminated screen, that I realized my story had already changed, even if I hadn't told anyone yet. Something inside me began to rise, a silent but firm force. I didn't know what tomorrow would hold, or if I would have the courage to expose everything, but I knew there was no going back to the way things were before. There was no more room for denial. The next morning, I was no longer the same. My body still trembled, as if bearing the weight of an unbearable revelation. But my gaze, it was no longer blind. He woke, as he always did, giving me a light kiss on the forehead and saying, "Good morning, my queen." His voice was the same, his gesture identical. But there, for the first time, I saw clearly the theater that had been unfolding for months. I took a deep breath and said, We need to talk. Now. He looked at me with an expression that mixed surprise and caution, like someone who feels they've been found out but is still trying to understand the full extent of the truth. I sat on the couch with my laptop open. I clicked on one of the conversations. I didn't need to say anything. His reaction was instantaneous. He buried his face in his hands, took a deep breath, and silence filled the room for long seconds. When he finally opened his mouth, it wasn't to deny it. He didn't try to justify it with lies. He simply said he was confused, that he'd felt disconnected from myself for a while, and that somehow the missionary inspired him more spiritually than I did. Hearing this was like being punched in the gut, not because of the confession itself, but because of the cruel weight of the words, as if all my value as a woman, a wife, a companion in faith and on this journey had been reduced to an empty comparison disguised as a spiritual argument. I was silent, for a few seconds, trying to understand where that coldness disguised as sincerity came from. He spoke as if delivering a thesis, not a repentance. There were no tears. There was no despair. There was simply a man trying to justify a cowardly choice with a pretty speech. That's when something inside me snapped. Because until that moment, a part of me still hoped he'd come to his senses, apologize, and say it was all a mistake, a character flaw, a stumble. But no, what I heard was an attempt to convince myself that perhaps the problem was within me. And it was at that precise moment that I understood the power of truth to set me free, even if it tears me apart. The truth showed me that I didn't need any more explanations or promises. I needed a decision, and that decision, though painful, was already forming within me. It wasn't just about him. It was about me, about my dignity, my story, my identity, because sometimes we need to break down to rebuild ourselves. And it was precisely at that point in the journey that something began to blossom amidst the rubble. He left the house that afternoon, leaving behind a silence that weighed more heavily than any argument. Sitting there, still scrolling through the open messages, trying to gather what little strength I had left, I thought the worst had already happened. But no. What followed was a series of revelations that made me question not only my marriage, but the very fabric of everything I believed in. A few days later, the pastor called me in for a chat. I expected support, guidance, maybe even a hug. But what I found was a cold, almost institutional environment. He didn't ask me how I was doing. He didn't want to know how I'd discovered everything. He simply said, "We have to protect the church's image. It's important that you have wisdom at this time." I froze. He wasn't concerned with the betrayal, the pain, the truth, but with appearance, as if I were the one tarnishing something sacred by simply sharing what had happened. And it didn't stop there. Within days, looks began to change. The sisters who had once embraced me so tenderly now looked away. Rumors began to circulate. They said I might be spiritually weakened, that wise women keep their homes. One even told me I needed to watch more and pray twice as hard, as if my husband's betrayal had been caused by my lack of prayer. It was then that I saw the hidden truth behind so many beautiful speeches. The structure that was supposed to welcome me was, in practice, silencing me. I, who had always served with dedication, who had opened my home, who had cared, who had been present at every event, in every cell group, had become the nuisance, the inconvenient one. And most cruel of all, he continued attending church normally. He continued to be called to the pulpit. He continued to be praised as a man of God. As for me, I was the unbalanced wife, the emotionally unstable one, the woman who hadn't properly cared for her own marriage. And hearing this, not from strangers, but from the spiritual leader who was supposed to protect and guide, was a blow no amount of marital betrayal could overcome. Because when pain comes from outside, we still find the strength to protect ourselves. But when it comes disguised as advice, loose verses, ready-made phrases, the scar that remains is deeper. It's a kind of invalidation that affects identity. My pain became taboo, my voice a threat, and I realized that people's judgment wasn't because they didn't understand my story, but because they couldn't accept that I was breaking the script they expected of me. And that's when a new decision began to mature within me. It wasn't about him anymore, nor about them. It was about who I was outside that system. Because when even the faith that sustained you becomes a stage for judgment, you begin to ask yourself, who am I when they take away all my papers? And that's exactly how loneliness arrived. Not with screams or slamming doors, but silently, slowly, as if knowing exactly where to strike. The invitations stopped. The groups I'd once been active in became empty for me. No one said anything directly, but the message was clear in each absence. I watched everything reorganize around me as if I'd been removed from the plot, and no one wanted to mention my name for fear of displeasing the story's new protagonist. He carried on as if nothing had happened. He'd show up at church holding her hand as if they were a blessed, approved, protected couple. And ironically, that was what many there demonstrated: protection, as if he were a victim of my instability, as if she were the redemption that helped him rediscover his purpose. And me? I became the uncomfortable memory of a story poorly told. There wasn't a single moment of genuine empathy, no honest conversation. No one called me. No one asked how I was coping alone. And perhaps the cruelest part wasn't even the abandonment, but the pretense. Those same people who once prayed with me, who shared tears in intense intercessions, now avoided even looking me in the eye, as if my pain were contagious, as if my presence exposed something they'd rather not see. Hypocrisy disguised as spirituality. At that time, I understood what it's like to walk through an invisible desert, the kind of emptiness no one notices because, on the outside, you're still there, standing, dressed, breathing. But on the inside, everything is in ruins. And it's in this kind of setting that we begin to access revelations that would never come in comfort. You begin to see behind the scenes of relationships, structures, intentions. This so-called communion was fragile, conditional, based on appearances, not truth. Empathy was selective, spirituality rehearsed. Every Sunday was a reminder that I was no longer welcome, that I no longer belonged. I came and went like a ghost. I knew they were talking about me. I could feel it in the air. And yet, I kept going. Not because it was masochism, but because there was still a part of me trying to grasp some root of true faith. Something that wasn't toxic. Something that still made sense. But everything around me screamed otherwise. It felt like shouting inside a crowded church, and no one could hear. As if my voice had been silenced. As if my existence there was a mistake. And it was in this raw vulnerability that a question began to haunt me day and night. Was everything I experienced truly spiritual? Or just disguised control? That's how, without realizing it, I began a journey of reconstruction I never imagined I would experience. Because what I was about to discover about myself, there comes a time when strength no longer comes from persistence, but from renunciation. And this was, perhaps, one of the most painful truths I had to face. For months, I persisted. I clung to every possibility of change, like someone holding onto a thread of hope about to snap. I did everything I was told a woman of God should do. I fasted until my body gave out. I cried through entire nights of prayer. I asked for wisdom. I asked for restoration. I asked for miracles. But with each passing day, the answer came in a screaming silence. This was consuming me alive. It wasn't a lack of faith. On the contrary, it was faith itself that sustained me until then. But little by little, I began to realize there was a stark difference between fighting for something and sacrificing yourself completely until you disappear. I no longer recognized myself in the mirror. I had dark circles under my eyes from sleepless nights, a constant ache in my heart, and a constant feeling of fighting alone for a story he'd already abandoned long before I admitted it. There were days when fear spoke louder, fear of judgment, scandal, guilt, because I was taught that divorce was synonymous with failure, that it was always a lack of forgiveness, a lack of humility, a lack of fear. But no one talked about what happens when marriage becomes an emotional prison, when the other uses spiritual rhetoric to keep you silent, submissive, exhausted, When the peace that should exist within the covenant becomes just another nice speech, completely devoid of practice. The decision didn't come suddenly. It dawned on me, little by little, like a revelation I could no longer ignore. Did I still love? Somehow, yes. But was I loving myself then? Definitely not. And it was this turning point that made me realize, continuing in that relationship was a slow form of self-annihilation. It was like living in a minefield where every step could trigger another emotional explosion. I no longer smiled. I no longer dreamed. I no longer made plans. And most seriously, I no longer prayed with the same sincerity, because everything inside me was in conflict. It was as if even God had been placed between me and my own freedom. It was then that I understood. Letting go wasn't giving up. It was, for the first time, choosing myself. It was rescuing the woman I'd been leaving behind amid broken promises, frustrated expectations, and a love that became an excuse for emotional abuse disguised as a spiritual crisis. The decision to leave was a mourning, one of the greatest, but it was also the first step toward a rebuilding I never imagined possible. Signing those papers seemed to seal the end of a life, but deep down, it was the beginning of another, a journey still uncertain, full of doubts, but with a clarity that permeated me completely. I could no longer pretend everything was okay, because finally, I had understood that I could no longer pretend everything was okay, because finally, I had understood that God did not create me to survive at my own expense. And it was precisely when everything fell apart, reputation, marriage, ministry, friendships, that something began to rebuild within me. But this time, it wasn't based on the approval of others, nor on the appearance of holiness. It was something quiet, profound, and true. Something that only those who have had their souls in ruins can understand. At first, it felt like floating in a void, as if I'd been ripped from a familiar, even toxic place, and placed in the middle of a desert where nothing made sense. But it was in this place that he found me again. Not with demands, not with pointing fingers, but with a presence that, for the first time in a long time, didn't demand performance. I didn't need to appear strong or spiritual. I just needed to be there, whole in my pain, and yet I was heard. It's strange to say this, but it was in the chaos that I heard God most clearly, not in the noisy meetings, nor in the rehearsed words of leaders who claimed to know me. I listened when no one else was around, in the silence of my room, on the cold bathroom floor, on mornings when all seemed lost. I listened when my tears were the only prayer I could muster, and it was there that I understood something I had never been taught with such depth. God doesn't rebuild with guilt. He rebuilds with love. Religion screams, but God's love whispers, and in that whisper, He reconstructed my identity, not as the betrayed wife, not as the silenced ex-wife, but as a daughter He never abandoned. Religion wanted me to be clothed in shame, to carry the weight of a failure that wasn't just mine, but God, in His essence, covered me with grace, and that was a shift in mindset. Because then I understood that true spirituality isn't measured by the number of ministries you lead, but by the peace that dwells within you even when the world around you is in ruins. It was in this new beginning that I realized how often we confuse God with the system they've created around Him. We confuse control with care, fear with respect, appearance with faith. And that's why so many people sink trying to appear strong, because they're leaning on the wrong structure. But when it all fell apart, I found myself leaning solely on Him. And ironically, it was the safest place I've ever been. He taught me to breathe again, to walk slowly, to trust without needing to understand everything. And when that happened, something inside me began to blossom. And it was in this silent blossoming that a new realization began to dawn on me. Something that, for a long time, I hadn't wanted to see, perhaps out of fear. Perhaps because I was already too emotionally exhausted to face yet another uncomfortable truth. But there, in the midst of this new beginning with God, when my soul was already beginning to breathe without pain, I saw what so many other women also experience, but almost never manage to name. Not all betrayal is visible. This revelation hit me like a firm whisper, the kind that allows no escape, Because there's a form of betrayal that doesn't show up in photos, that doesn't become a public scandal, but that corrodes inside with the same force, or even greater. It's emotional abandonment. It's when he's there, but he's not. When your body shares the same roof, but your soul has long since departed. When decisions are made without you, when your pain is silenced in the name of a supposed higher calling, when you find yourself competing with the ministry, with the platform, with the image of spirituality he must maintain. It's a more subtle betrayal, harder to explain. Because there's no concrete proof, the impact is devastating. It's that constant feeling of inadequacy, as if everything you do is insufficient. It's the weight of walking on eggshells in your own home, as if any emotion you feel is an exaggeration, as if you're a distraction on his path to God. It's cruel because it's invisible. And the scariest part? Often, it comes disguised as holiness. How many women today sit in church pews, clothed in faith, but bleeding inside? How many have learned not to complain because they were taught that being a woman of God means enduring in silence? How many carry guilt that isn't even theirs, but was forced down their throats by manipulative speeches that use verses taken out of context as emotional handcuffs? This is a hidden truth, and it needs to be exposed, because emotional abandonment is also a type of infidelity, and contempt, disdain, constant indifference. All of this also hurts. It hurts dignity, self-esteem, faith. And the most perverse thing is when all of this comes wrapped in spiritual language, as if his mission were forgotten, nullified, suffocated, while he shines in the name of God. As if his pain were a lack of spiritual maturity. As if questioning were already rebellion. As if suffering in silence were proof of faith. And for a long time, I believed this, until God showed me that he doesn't condone this kind of oppression disguised as religiosity, that he isn't complicit in relationships that destroy women in the name of a misinterpreted hierarchy. The truth is that many are being betrayed within relationships where the betrayal doesn't involve lovers. It involves absences, where the adultery isn't with another person, but with a misguided vocation. And when this happens, something inside the woman dies a little each day. And when that realization became undeniable, something inside me, which had previously only known how to bow, began to rise. For the first time in a long time, I stopped apologizing for feeling. I stopped trying to fit the mold of the woman who endured everything in silence, believing that this was synonymous with faith. The process was slow, confusing, and sometimes even lonely, but it was real. And each layer that fell away revealed a version of myself I hadn't even recognized. A version that was no longer sustained by fear, but by awareness. A version that looked at itself with respect, after so long waiting to be validated by someone else's eyes. This change didn't begin with pretty phrases or sudden force. It began with small, daily decisions. Like when I chose to sleep peacefully, even though I hadn't pleased everyone. Like when I refused guilt-ridden advice. Like when I stopped accepting invitations that put me back in that cycle of silence and self-denial. These were decisions invisible to many, but huge ones for me. And that's exactly where true transformation begins, behind the scenes, in the part no one sees, but which determines the course of everything. Because pain didn't destroy me, it showed me a new path. It took me from a place where faith had been used as a chain and brought me to a path where faith became liberation, where God was no longer a judge pointing the finger at me, but a father reminding me that I was created with value, that being a woman of faith isn't about remaining silent in the face of injustice. It's about having the courage to face the truth, even if it dismantles everything that seemed right, because truth liberates. And I needed to be freed from much more than a bad marriage. I needed to be freed from the distorted ideas I carried about love, submission, identity, and even God. I began to understand that it's not spiritual if it destroys you, that it's not sacred if it diminishes you, that God doesn't rejoice in a burdened heart feigning gratitude, and that enduring emotional abuse isn't a cross, it's a prison. How many women confuse loyalty with self-abandonment? How many have learned that being strong means silently accepting everything, when in reality, This only fuels cycles of pain and dependence. True strength, I discovered, is born when you understand that you no longer need to beg for affection. That true love doesn't require you to disappear so the other person can shine. That respect can't be begged for. And that there's nothing wrong with saying, enough. This enough didn't come with anger, but with lucidity. It was like turning on a light in a room where I'd been stumbling for years. Suddenly, I saw everything clearly. I saw how much I'd been sacrificing myself in the name of a false peace. I saw how much I'd been diminishing my dreams, my voice, my very presence, so as not to disturb, so as not to provoke, so as to be the ideal wife. But there's no ideal when the exchange is unilateral, when one side sacrifices themselves completely and the other feeds off of it. That's not marriage. That's exhaustion disguised as commitment. And that's exactly why today, looking back, I'm no longer the same. Not because time has passed, but because my mindset has changed. Because I allowed God to rebuild me without the rubble of guilt. And He did it with so much love, with so much patience, that today I understand. The greatest fidelity I can have with Him is not betraying who He created me to be. I learned that I don't need to nullify myself to be loved, that healthy love welcomes, listens, builds, and that God never asked me to erase myself to keep up appearances. It was the opposite. He called me to live in truth, and truth, however painful it may be at first, always brings relief. It always brings light. It always brings direction. This journey taught me something I previously thought impossible. There is life after pain. There is life after loss. There is life after the end. And it's not just any life. It's a life with more clarity, more autonomy, more peace. Because when you leave a place where you've been diminished for so long, any step toward yourself is already a revolution. And that's exactly what happened. Pain forced me to look at myself in a new way. It took me off autopilot. It showed me that I no longer needed to survive. I could live with wholeness, with dignity, with truth. And no, it wasn't easy. Sometimes it still hurts. Sometimes the memory weighs heavily. But the difference is that now I have awareness. I know what I deserve. I know what I no longer accept. And I know that God is not on the side of those who oppress, but of those who have the courage to break the cycle. What once seemed like weakness, crying, walking away, saying no, I now understand as signs of strength, because breaking away requires more courage than continuing. Because respecting yourself, after so long of ignoring yourself, is a radical act of self-love. And when we reconnect with this love, not the romantic kind, not the idealized kind, but the love that comes from God and redeems us from within, we stop accepting crumbs. We learn to stand tall, even when everything seems to want to knock us down. We understand that we are not alone, that heaven has never abandoned us, that God's silence is often just the space needed for our voices to finally resonate, because He does not condone abuse nor forced silence. He wants us alive, full, whole. And it was from this place of truth that my reconstruction gained strength, because I no longer wanted to pretend. I no longer wanted to please out of fear. I no longer wanted to be half. The pain was the soil, but what blossomed there was awareness. It was healing. It was a new way of existing, a new way of believing, a new way of loving, starting with myself. And perhaps this is the most powerful part of the entire journey, discovering that you no longer need to wait for permission to take care of yourself, to prioritize yourself, to start over as many times as necessary. Because when you walk through pain head-on, without disguise, without escape, you find a strength that was hidden right in the midst of the chaos. A strength that didn't come to harden you, but to align you with who you were created to be from the beginning. A whole woman, a beloved, daughter, a soul in process, but free. And it's precisely at this point in the journey, when pain no longer defines me, that something even more profound begins to happen. When we face pain head-on, without disguise, without escape, you find a strength that was hidden right in the midst of the chaos, a strength that didn't come to harden you, but to align you with who you were created to be from the beginning. A whole woman, a beloved daughter, a soul in process, but free. And it's precisely at this point in the journey, when pain no longer defines me, that something even more profound begins to happen. If you feel an inner voice trying to warn you that something isn't right, I invite you to pay attention. Don't ignore the signs. Often, they come as whispers, slight disconnects in everyday life, small cracks in what seemed like an unshakable wall. But ignoring this in the name of peace can lead you to an inner silence that corrodes the soul. I understand. We've been taught that enduring is proof of strength, that suffering in silence is a demonstration of faith. But this mindset can become a trap. And that's why I now want to extend a heartfelt invitation to you. Don't silence your pain. Know the difference between praying and remaining silent. Pray, yes, but also take a stand. God is love, but He is also justice. And if there's something inside you telling you that love is being used to justify violated boundaries, listen to that voice. Faith doesn't ask you to disappear. It asks you to remain whole. And sometimes the most spiritual decision we can make is the decision to put ourselves first. Because loving God includes loving yourself, protecting your soul, caring for your dreams, respecting your limits. I want you to know that you are not alone on this journey. Perhaps you are in a place where words of faith are abundant, but truth is scarce. Perhaps you are surrounded by people, but feel profoundly alone. Perhaps you carry a pain that no one sees. I've been there. And so, I want you to know something important. You deserve someone who walks beside you without asking you to silence your own cry. You deserve a love that doesn't make you doubt who you are. You deserve respect, support, truth, empathy. This is the justice God calls us to live, not as an empty rule, but as a transformed life. If another question has arisen within you, a curiosity about how much that pain can be a signal for change, if you sense that there are hidden parts of your story that need to be revealed before you can even find relief, trust that hunch. Perhaps the exact journey you need is still unfolding, and it turns out that, often, reconnection with God happens not in the lit room, but behind the scenes of the wounded soul, in the silence of the dark room, when there is no audience. And it is there that true transformation happens. Your steps may be heading toward reinvention, and that's a good thing, because where there's a decision to maintain emotional health, there's an impact and a sign that you're honoring yourself, just as God honored every part of His creation. The power of transformation comes from within, but it also requires a decision. The decision to break with what destroys you, to rebuild with what strengthens you. This decision may be silent, but it generates enough noise to shake structures. This decision can begin with a simple look within and end with you rebuilding your life with dignity. If these words are echoing within you, leaving a tremor of identification, perhaps it's a sign that your journey of reconstruction is just beginning, and I'm here to walk with you, even if only through my words, because no spiritual journey is made alone. And when we choose not to silence our pain, we're not just saving ourselves, we're paving the way for others to be saved too. And that's what makes all of this so meaningful. That's what gives meaning to the hidden truth, to the revelations, to the real impact of this story that, despite beginning with betrayal and abandonment, can gain chapters of healing, lightness, purpose, and light. And it is from this place that we continue. Because when a woman finds the courage to truly listen to herself, she also finds the key to freeing others who are still trapped in invisible chains. It's as if a new language begins to emerge within us, a language that requires no explanations, just presence. A language that says, I've felt this too. I've been that woman too. And when this connection happens, something changes. Pain ceases to be a prison and becomes a bridge. Shame transforms into compassion. And silence finally finds a voice. That's why, if this topic resonates with you, if in some way these words touched your heart and resonated with memories you might not have even known were still there, leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read each message with an open heart, And often it's precisely these exchanges that shape future content. Your story matters. Your pain is not small. And when you share, even if just a sentence, you help expand this space of truth, faith, and healing. And if you feel like continuing this journey with me, a real journey, with falls, new beginnings, discoveries, and faith, subscribe to the channel here. Not out of formality, but because this small action has a huge impact. It's what makes this content reach more women who are exactly where you once were. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content that we don't see everywhere. Content that touches deeply, that doesn't have a spiritual veneer, but that has purpose, commitment, and truth. As I said, my journey doesn't end here, and yours doesn't have to either, even if it feels like you've reached your limit. Because there's a rebuilding process that goes beyond survival or simple overcoming. There's a transformation that happens when you decide to look at your story with courage, empathy, and truth. Not as something that defines you, but as something that propels you forward. And if this story touched you, if at any point a word made your heart race, comment below with a "Me too." Do you know why? Because together, Christian women who are healing find strength in sisterhood. Each "Me too" is a lit ember in the midst of darkness. It's the sign that you are not alone. And it is this collective echo that has the power to make a real impact not only on us, but on so many others who are still afraid. To listen to themselves, to speak out, to free themselves. It's in these delicate scenes where faith meets pain that we have the opportunity to be a true community. Not one that tells you to pray and remain silent, but one that welcomes, questions, and helps you rise up. Your comment can be the starting point for others to feel welcomed, for others to see that it's okay not to be okay, and that seeking help, reflection, support, and light doesn't make you less spiritual. It makes you more human. Your voice here is valuable. It has impact, and it's what makes all the difference in the continuation of this journey. Your participation here is what allows this channel to continue growing and reaching even more women who need to hear that faith doesn't require silence, that God doesn't condone abuse, and that the most beautiful transformation is the one that begins from the inside out. Every subscription, every comment, every new woman who encounters this content through you spreads this message where it truly matters, in the hearts that bleed in silence, in the couples who still need to understand that a healthy marriage is a partnership, and in the women who are still waiting for permission to stand up for themselves. My story, unfortunately, didn't start well, but it continues and continues with courage, truth, reconciliation, and purpose. If you want to walk along, if you want to be strengthened on this true journey of reconstruction, sign up here, because I still have much to share about forgiveness, which is liberation, not annihilation, about emotional reconstruction, which is not a luxury but a right, about a renewed mindset, which is the foundation for healthy and authentic relationships. And look, I get it. This conversation seems long, dense, and intense. But real life is like that. It's not just a one-off emotion. It's not just about any one episode. It's about the continuity of the journey, with daily decisions, small choices that together transform destinies. And what lies ahead will bring conversations about emotional reconstruction, about how faith translates into boundaries, about new mindsets that truly build. Because the healing journey is ongoing, and it needs a home, even if only virtual, where these conversations are possible, free, and welcoming.